Okay, so next we're going to talk about a subject that's close to a lot of telcos' hearts, and that is the trouble with data, which has been a long and vexed issue. I'm delighted to welcome Mark Newman, who is Chief Analyst with TM Forum. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you very much, Annie. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody, wherever you are in the world. So I'm looking at data from a pretty holistic telco perspective. So when I think about Martin's presentation just on IoT, that's pretty specific in terms of how you use data. So I'm now going to be talking the next 20 minutes about looking at data across the whole organization and how telcos are creating or not creating a strategy for the whole organization. Next slide, please, Annie. So I'm not sure if you're controlling or I'm controlling, but oh no, I can control. Great. Okay. So we started looking at this. So just for clarity, so I work within the research and media part of TM Forum. We operate a modest research capability with an analyst team, and a lot of our work is done surveying the industry, particularly surveying our members, but also surveying the broader industry as well. A lot of the survey work that we've done in the last 12 months has touched on the issue of data, and these numbers are from a specific survey we did on the use of data across the organization. And I think it's a given that if you ask any telecoms executive how important is the use of analytics across your organization, very few are going to say it's anything other than essential. And so that narrative is clearly accepted and adopted by the telecoms industry. That doesn't necessarily mean, however, that operators are investing enough in their data strategy, that they're working hard enough to build a data-centric organization. It may well be that they just lack the knowledge and understanding in terms of how to properly leverage and use data across the organization. So I think when we initially think about the main use cases for analytics across the organization, I think a lot of the thought process here. Next slide, please, Annie. Is around the customer experience function. Could we move slides, please?
You're controlling your slides.
Am I controlling?
Yeah. You okay?
Okay, I'm controlling. Thank you. So when we think about the value of data and the customer experience, it's pretty clear that provide a strong digital experience, you need to better leverage your data in the organization. However, it seemed to me when I did some research here that there wasn't a clear belief that effective investment in and use of data led to a better customer experience. Maybe more importantly, there wasn't necessarily a clear acceptance that more investment in the customer experience led to a more profitable business. Now that's quite a bold statement to make, and I think that while every telco will talk about the importance of customer experience, they haven't necessarily made the strong business case for investment in customer experience leading to a more profitable business. Indeed, when you ask for some of the rationale, some of the arguments behind investing in customer experience, often it's as much as anything about reducing the cost of serving customers, as well as providing a genuine, stronger customer experience. So that linkage all the way from investment in the use of data through an excellent customer experience through to a more profitable business, that ROI has not necessarily been made in telcos across the world, which maybe explain why it's taken the industry so long to prioritize investment in data. And let's face it, we have been talking about the value of data, of better analytics in telco for the last 7, 9, 10 years. And I think it's still the case today that most telcos believe they have quite a long way to go in terms of how they can become more data-centric organizations. Now, this is not to say that there are not many leading thought leaders, consultancy firms who are making the case for joining those dots between customer experience, data, and a more profitable business. this is some work I think which came from McKinsey. I've borrowed this slide from a data orchestration vendor called Teradata that we've worked with at TM Forum. And this is quite interesting because this is McKinsey looking at the telco of the future, I think they choose to call it, and looking at different categories of telcos and dividing telcos and creating these categories based on how effectively telcos are using data. And so, the isolated telco, if you like, is a telco that McKinsey will describe as an operator which has a pretty piecemeal approach towards its use of data across the organization. Tens and hundreds of models, mostly running in a batch function applying. It's more of an evolution from a business intelligence function, a genuine big data approach. And in the McKinsey way of viewing the world, they're saying these organizations have an NPS of between 10 and 20. The little picture below is just giving examples of US telcos and comparing where they are. Then if we look at this, the integrated model, and this I guess is where telcos today are pushing, and this is for telcos who are endeavoring to create a more holistic approach towards data, who have a strategy built around data lakes and data warehouses, but they're still coming to terms with the challenges of how to deploy that across different parts of the organization. They're on a journey, but they still have some way to go. And I think what's interesting when we look at the use of the effective use of data in different sectors, if we look at the banking industry, for example, banking has I think moved ahead of telcos in terms of digitization. And as a result, NPS of many of the banks has moved way ahead of telco in this category of 50 plus. Then we have this orchestrated model, and there's this term data orchestration, which we'll come to. And this is looking at telcos adopting millions of models for data, mostly running in real time. They're data-centric organizations, and we have this term, a segment of one. So this is typically looking at telcos providing a full digital experience where you are a segment of one as a customer. And in this vision, you have an NPS which is going to be 70 plus. And so this is kind of interesting because this is McKinsey saying that you can use or you should be using data to determine your future success as a telco. So I guess the question that begs of telcos is just how important is data holistically across your organization in terms of your strategy and your future approach towards growing your business. So I just wanted to speak a few minutes about exactly what the different functions in the telco, what they're doing in terms of the data strategies and where most value lies in different categories of data across the organization. And so we talked a little bit about data for customer experience. I think the two biggest areas are in telco are customer experience data and network and operations data. And we'll talk about those again in a minute. But they're not the only data sets that we can or we should think about. So there's data that comes from outside the organization about the brand and reputation, data from social media, supply chain data, employee data. So if you survey the industry, unsurprisingly, the industry will say that customer experience data and network operations data are the two big pots. But actually, there's a huge number of other internal and external data sets that you should be leveraging as a telecoms organization. Going back to the survey we conducted. So this survey we conducted was of more than 100 telcos. And the executives that we interviewed were people who worked in data science teams, or they were individuals, particularly in the IT function, who were heavy users of data. And so we wanted to look in some more detail at how successful operators were in leveraging data for different parts of the customer experience function. And so, based on these numbers, we have, about half operators believe that they're using CRM data to deliver more personalized service. I think probably all agree some way to go yet. Less would say it's being effectively used for digital touch points. The most interesting response here, I think, is this third one. So we make good use of social media data to manage customer life cycles. So clearly, there is a gap today in how telcos are able to use that social media data from Facebook, from Twitter, and to build that into a better service to be delivered to their customers. I just moved now to that number at the far right here. So we're using network data about congestion to inform our front-end systems. And one of the main things that we've been looking at in our research is how effectively organizations are able to leverage data across the organization. So to move data sideways, if you like, to take network data and make that a strategy for improving the service given to customers. So when we think about network data, is that data mainly being used for the network itself, or is it equally being adopted for front-end customer-facing systems? Then I think if we think about the network, and discussion around network automation is very topical, and clearly without an effective use of real-time data in the network, you're not going to have a very successful approach towards automation. When you speak to operators about how successful they are at using network data to identify problems, 2/3 of respondents believe they're doing that pretty effectively. But when we think about some of the capabilities of using advanced analytics, moving towards AI and machine learning to transition towards self-healing networks, we're still at the very, very early stages of that process. A number of obstacles, challenges to be addressed, and we'll come on to those in a minute. So I think when we look at the network, yes, there are strong strategies for identifying issues, but for actually moving towards self-healing closed loop systems, I think we're still quite a long way away from where we need to get to. So when we look at a telecoms operator organization, these are just an example of different functions, different departments, different divisions within the organization. The IT team, the network team, R&D, enterprise line of business, wholesale, consumer. They will all have strategies and investment programs and preferred partners for their analytic strategies. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they are aligned across the organization. So what this means is that if you want to use data that sits somewhere else in the business, you may well find it challenging. And you will find it challenging because a number of different reasons, because the data is prepared in a different format, because the data doesn't have the same taxonomy, if you like, doesn't have the same data model. So moving data across the organization is something that we struggle with in telecoms. Moving data within the same division departmental silo is something which is being addressed because it sits as a standalone, as an approach which is managed as a single entity and organization. So you will have your suppliers working together on common data models, common approaches. So you can move towards an approach where you're better using data within the network, but it's moving horizontally where we see the main challenges. So going back to this survey, and this is quite interesting. So this is a survey, as I mentioned, of about 100 data science teams and large users of data, and we asked them how effectively they believed they were using data within their organizations. And we gave them the chance to give a score of between 1 and 100. So if you were ineffective in using your data, you would score 1. If you're effective, you would score 100. And the median result here was 54. So what is interesting is that while there's a recognition amongst operators that an effective, leveraging data effectively is absolutely essential, the practitioners in the organization who are responsible for fulfilling that data strategy believe they're only scoring at 54%, or so 5 out of 10, in terms of how effective they're using data. I would expect the overall number to be below 54, because if you're a data science team, you're likely to have a more positive view about what you're doing than if you're someone else in the organization who is a consumer or potential consumer of that data. So challenges. So why is it the case that telcos struggle with data? Well, this again is some numbers from our survey, and these are people who answered the question that these are major barriers to the use of data efficiently in our organization. So the lack of a consistent data model. So what we mean by a data model is the way in which we describe what the data does. And data can mean a completely different thing to one person to another. You will define, you will categorize differently. So if you don't have a consistent data model across the organization, how can you reuse data from one part of the organization to another part of the organization? Generally, operators do not have single data models. They have a number of different data models, and they're trying to harmonize, but it's extremely difficult to do that. Some of the sort of softer reasons why: lack of urgency about the importance of leveraging data. So this is a really interesting one. And whose responsibility is it to improve your data strategy? Is it a priority at board level, or does it sit below board level? Is it really being given the attention it needs by everybody, or is it quite a long way down the priority list of a number of different executives in the organization? Lack of expertise about how to collect and leverage data. Again, this is something that that operators are doing with data science teams, but too often the data science teams get involved in too much nitty-gritty about cleaning data, about data consistency. They're not necessarily being given the latitude to think more creatively about how to use the data and to think of data as an enabling capability. Dirty data we talk about a lot, so data which is simply not very good. It's dirty, which means that you have to spend a lot of time cleaning up the data. That takes time, that takes money. It slows down your success in properly using that data. Data governance, and this is quite a big one. So when we talk about data governance, it's saying, do you have a centralized rule book for how you leverage, how you use data in your organization? And if you don't have that strong data governance approach, you're going to have each department doing things differently. And then formatting issues, which I guess is, you could put in the same category as dirty data or lack of consistent data models. I think the question should be asked, which is, are operators investing enough in their data strategies? Through my research, it would seem that telecoms industry is not investing as much in data as other industries. If you compare it with banking, for example, it's simply not investing as much as banking. Now, why is that the case? Well, I guess it's a question of prioritization. I'm showing you here, this is something that sits within TM Forum called the digital maturity model. And this is a way in which you as a company can measure your maturity across different domains. Customer strategy, technology, operations, culture. It's quite significant that within the last year, we've added data as being one of those maturity functions. So it is worth a category in its own right, because it's as important as getting your technology or your operations right. But then, does that feed through into investment? Is there enough investment taking place in the right areas? So leadership around data is an interesting one. So what's the best way for you to structure your organization as a telecoms operator to more efficiently leverage data? Now, an operator may have a chief digital officer. It may, such as Vodafone, have a chief data officer. It really doesn't matter who that person is, so long as they have the complete commitment and buy-in from the rest of the board. Quite interesting. In Deutsche Telekom in Germany, the chief finance officer is responsible for data. And you think, well, why the chief finance officer? It's not because the starting point was he was a person that knew most about data. It was because people listened to when the CFO says we need to do something, it will get done. So it needs complete buy-in and commitment. And I think one other important point here is that if you're chief data officer, there is a risk that you build your own silo, your own data strategy, where really what is needed is someone that sits equally across the whole organization. The trouble is often those CDO roles, they become more advisory roles. Often the CDOs are not properly empowered, which I think is a challenge. So this, I think, is something that I took from Bain and Co. And so I know when we think about data strategies, there is what we've learned from other industries is that the reason you invest in data is because you have specific use cases that you want to address. But actually, the real richness and potential for data to make a difference is to think of data as enabling ability. So that means that you take a more holistic view of data rather than building technology and suppliers that are designed just to fulfill one single use case. You need to build data foundationally to enable the whole business rather than make it simply about single use cases. Because if it's about single use cases, you will end up with creating a very fragmented, difficult set of issues and strategies to try to bring together. And sometimes that can just be too difficult. It can just overwhelm you because of the complexity of making it work. Just to leave you with a few thoughts in terms of what operators can be doing to become more successful. I think having a vision is really important. What is your vision around being a data-driven organization? I mean, we talk about customer journeys, and if your vision is to have that segment of one and to provide a digital experience as good as what a digital leader will provide, then clearly you need to make data a priority in your organization. Governance is absolutely essential if operators are to have this ability to move data across the organization rather than just going down within different functions. So defining governance, making it something which is taken seriously across the organization is going to be essential. When it comes to adopting a common data model, many telcos just don't have confidence that they can do this. It's just too difficult to make it happen. Maybe you need to find the right vendor to help you with strategy, and maybe you work with a hyperscale cloud provider that helps you in that regard. Don't allow a central team to become another silo, something we've talked about already. Build a quarterly and annual roadmap, report on your progress. So how much profile does data get in your company? Do you talk to your staff about it on a regular basis? Do you measure your progress? If you don't talk about it regularly, you will not get the profile that it needs. When it comes to 5G and Edge, if you don't have a strong analytics strategy, you simply will not be able to use 5G and Edge to build those sophisticated enterprise use cases that we're so excited about today. Capabilities as well as use cases. I don't ever think a data strategy is going to be focused just around capabilities, but you need to have a capability strategy as well as a use case strategy. And then lastly, engage with public cloud vendors. And certainly when we look at operators such as Vodafone now working quite closely with Google on this, we do increasingly see operators engaging with the big public cloud vendors to take a bigger, more holistic approach towards their data strategy. Okay, so that's me. That was very rushed, Annie, but it was a lot to squeeze in a short period of time, and giving a holistic view is, I think, very much what I was looking to deliver.
Thank you, Mark. Well, I just think it's really interesting, having watched this area myself for a lot of years. The basic thing that McKinsey is still trying to establish, really, or that Telcos is still trying to grasp, is that it really works and that it's an economically successful thing to do. And I think after all these years, it's astounding we haven't really got to that first base yet.
Well, and I think part of the McKinsey thinking is if you get your customer experience right, then competition is less of an issue. So if the customer experience is great, you don't really worry about your competitors. But it seems that as an industry, we struggle with that, and we're very focused on our competition. And I'm not completely convinced that operators do believe that customer experience in its own is enough. You look at someone like a Bezos and Amazon, and you look at, he writes his annual letter to shareholders, and every year he writes about customer experience. It's the first thing that matters to him. And I think telcos are maybe more tactical than that, more driven by quarterly numbers than that. And it's, I think we're making progress, but we're a long way from that, from data having that profile within and customer experience having that profile in the organization.
To me, one of my favorite things anybody ever said to me about customer experience in telcos was when was the last time you called Amazon? And then they said, actually, that's not the question. The real question is, when was the last time did you need to?
Yeah, exactly, because it's so good you don't need to call them. But
I think I've called them twice in 20 years.
Yeah, and I think the customer experience one is difficult because telcos still have very much an omni-channel strategy, and clearly, with the pandemic, they need to lean more on their digital channels. But I think it's digital just part of the mix, and I think maybe I think when you compare telecoms with, let's say, with banking, the traditional financial services companies have had to up their game, maybe because there's been more upstarts in the fintech space. And also, I think they've had a clear strategy for reducing their retail footprint and cutting their costs. And I think sometimes it's a lack of clarity around strategy and prioritization, which holds the industry back.
Well, I think considering what a mess banks were in on the same front as the telcos, it's a bit astonishing they overtook the telcos somehow. We have a question for you, Mark. One of our attendees asked, do you have an example of a telco that has achieved the data to profit link? Who is the best in class? Good luck with that.
Yeah. So in one of my research projects, I worked really hard to try to find that link. There's a case study run at TM Forum looking at Vodafone's investment in a whole new strategy around analytics, and you actually could see an improvement in terms of reducing churn rates in the following 12 months, and you could see a margin improvement in their profitability. But it was pretty hard to bring out those numbers. Now, other factors at play that made it difficult to categorically say that is the case. So in terms of where we are in the best in class, I really struggle to find a telco where we say we're best in class. I think many telcos are making small marginal improvements in their digital touch points. And so I think we are seeing increasing adoption of mobile apps, but it's pretty slow and painful. And I struggle to find a best-in-class example yet. There's other operators who have launched their own digital-only brands. So maybe it's in recognition of the fact how hard it is to make this happen. You launch your own digital brand, and you see how that works, and whether you can import some of those learnings back into your core business.
Okay, so Mark, one of our attendees is going to leave us with the thought that a key issue is a lack of data architect, maybe within telcos typically.
Yeah, and so I think that's probably a fair comment, and I think it goes back to the point about investment and prioritization. And when we think about data science teams, they spend too much time troubleshooting and not enough time strategizing. And until that starts to shift, and until telcos bring in the right technology partners as well, it's going to be hard to make real progress, because I think there's so much existing investment in systems. We look at telcos' challenges today, it's all about legacy, isn't it? Every challenge that telcos have is around how to address legacy, and analytics is no different in that.
Mark, thank you very much. A pleasure as always. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Annie. Thanks, everyone.